So to get the others to come in. Okay, good morning, everyone. Once again, this is a new module, a new session actually that I've introduced the first time for you all for the operation subject. Before we move on to this, do you have any questions from the or clarifications from the last session? Right? Any questions or clarifications from the last session? I meant to do a quiz Kahoot, but I didn't have time to set it up. So I'm just asking a question to understand whether you all remember what was taught. Okay, I'm asking what is not part of logistics, A, B, C, or D? I don't know whether you can see it clearly. One is plan, source, procure. B is plan, source, deliver. C is transport, warehousing, and source. None of the above. If you know what logistics is and what supply chain is, you will know the answer. Who's for A, who's for B, who's for C, and who's for D? Yeah? Sorry. Number, transport, warehousing, sourcing. Who's for C? What is not part of, or read it properly. What is not part of logistics? So if you know what is logistics, then you know what is not. So what does logistics include? Transport and warehousing, any other? Yeah. Transport includes forward transport and reverse logistics both, right? So what's the answer? D, none of the above, no? Because that transport warehousing has source, so that's not a right answer. So it's not, yeah? I try to confuse you a bit, right? So maybe next time I will get the Kahoot quiz so that I know what your understanding is. So the hopefully you know the difference, because difference is very important. That's basic supply chain 101. So supply chain is starting from what? From the what? Starting point is what? Planning. Very good. Very often people say supplier. Yes, once you plan all that, then it starts from supplier operationally. But you start with planning. Planning has two parts. What are the two parts? Demand planning, supply planning. So demand plans looks at the customer side, the demand, and based on that, you look at history or maybe sensing the demand. Now with technology being really advanced, you can sense the demand and shape the demand. So you look at what's there with AI tools and maybe machine learning tools and all of there. So you can really make use of the demand in a more closer time horizon than looking at the historical trend, because historical trend may not give you the real picture now because of the constant changes, the topic that we're going to discuss today happening in our operations. So you can't sometimes, if you don't know why the demand has gone up or down, or there are a lot of outliers which will, not make, which will make your forecast inaccurate if you don't really read those peaks and troughs in the historical trends, right? So if you're very well informed of what's happening in each and every point, and if you're a good demand planner, you will make notes, you know why it is at the monthly review meetings, and then you will remove those outliers and then cleanse the demand and look at the future demand. But nowadays, a lot of people don't look at the history. Yes, it will give some direction, but it will not really give a true picture because the situation is really different now. And therefore, you need to look at closer, near real-time demand wherever possible so that you can respond to it accurately. Having said that, a supply chain requires lead times. You may sense the demand, but it requires time. There's a lead time to order things, right? So therefore, companies now, with this today's session, you will also understand the longer supply chains are becoming shorter now, right? Because when there's a disruption, what happened was like everybody started sourcing from China because of cost reasons, and they were the factory of the world. Now, everybody after the COVID pandemic realized that you shouldn't put all your eggs into one basket. So the whole world put the eggs into Chinese basket, and when China had a cold, or maybe it became a flu and it became a pandemic, and then the whole world also contracted that. So that's the issue that we have. So everybody now is looking at, should we look at a backup plan? So they talk about China plus one strategy, right? You can't pull the plug out immediately because China is quite that way evolved and, very difficult to pull the plug out. Having said that, recently Apple moved to Chennai to produce this Apple 16 Pro. So that also has happened because they already have the Foxconn factory in Chennai. So we need to also understand the specific aspects of how supply chains are becoming narrower now. Longer supply chains is a bit of a problem, but you need to also look at shortening the supply chains, right? And also at the same time, understanding different events that happen in a supply chain so that you can accurately predict the future demand. And that way you will not have huge inventories, disappointments with the customer because you're going out of stock and all of that, right? Okay, so when you say logistics, there were three things, no? We do in logistics, right? You said transport and warehousing. If you look at, I'll give one, inbound logistics. What are the other two? Outbound, and what's the other third one? Yeah, reverse logistics, right? Because that's also becoming really important now. One thing is because of the sustainability concerns that we have, right? You will have to, because you can't be just dumping and saying, no, it's the consumer who has dumped it. No, if you are producing something now, you have to be responsible till the end of the life cycle of that particular product, right? So countries are putting, Sri Lanka is that way, although we have laws, it's not implemented. But Sri Lanka also have this extended producer responsibility. Your responsibility doesn't end with the factory. After the consumer usage also, you have a role to play. So if the consumers are just dumping somewhere, then you have to be responsible. You have to have a mechanism to pick those packaging and also make it more environmentally friendly. Even if they dump it, then there is no much of a big impact. So you have that, and that's become very, very soon it become law. And then I won't mention the company name, but one company is now having a target saying that whatever you sell, that equivalent amount of volume you need to also collect as waste also. So if your wrappers or tubes or whatever that they are, so that's how they're, so you can't be 100% setting the infrastructure because you don't have proper recycling ecosystem in this country. Yes, while pockets of activities happening for certain industries like the garment industry. Can you tell me what do they do in the garment industry? Some best practice example. Yeah, what do they do? Huh? Sorry? Yeah, no, I'm talking about the recycle part of it. Yes, you have to do, if you're having a factory, you have to have EPL license and all of that, and then you need to have an effluent treatment plant. And VOD, COD targets have to be met, and you cannot just dump it. I'm talking about the packaging that you have in the industry. How do they use through recycling? least to make the yarn. Yeah. What's the company name? Famous company. But then sorry. Yeah. Yes. So I just do a search. I forget the name now. It went off my mind. There is a company who actually collects marine polluting. I mean the waste, because we dump somewhere, then it gets washed ashore, and those plastic bottles they make yarns out of it. And then, in fact, the Sri Lankan cricket team in 2019, their T-shirt was made of that. No, MAS, but there's a no, they are not MAS, but what's the company name? Trash to cat. No, some other, I forget the name. Do a search. Sri Lanka to the no, not quotes. Yeah, no, forget. Come on, guys, you don't know this company, famous company, right? So they have actually an app also you can download, and then if you see some waste happening in different parts of the different locations, you can actually inform them, and then they will pick it up. So that kind of a system they have. It's actually a globally known, and they got a lot of awards. Okay, it come to me. I'll later on tell you. So reverse logistics is an important part. One thing is to comply with the law, and also being a good corporate citizen. You should not dump things, right? And you should be responsible. Finally, plastics will take about 400, 500 years to get degraded. And sometimes companies talk about, using what do you call biodegradable plastic, but they use microplastic. It's even more worse because it can get into your food chain and you will ingest it. And recently they have found out microplastics are available in human placenta. So the kids also will get it. And even in the air, you have that. So that's why this Express Pearl ship which got burnt and all of that, there was these plastic nodules, and they were putting a lot of pressure on the ship owner, saying that, this will impact our food chain and all of that stuff. So a lot of complications are there. So you need to really look at, other countries that you cannot just go and dump it, but you have to do that. So EPR license and all is going to come into force very soon. So reverse logistics is also an important part in logistics that we need to look at. But unfortunately, we don't have a proper ecosystem in this country. We have a list of recyclers. In fact, these plastics can be used on road surface. In Borupana Road, there all these plastics are, finally this thing, and they have with tar, with bitumen, they mix it and put it on the road surface. Also, India, they do it very well, and they make pallets. So, I mean, we don't have such an ecosystem in this country, waste collectors and all of that, right? Okay, so that's about from last time. So I hope you have an idea about supply chain. So that was the introduction, and from that, we will have to look at what are the risks that you have to keep in mind in supply chains, right? So could you tell me what are the few disruptions that we experience in the last few years globally? Because we cannot talk about what's happening in Sri Lanka because we live in a globalized environment. So what's happening around us globally also has a bearing on all of us now. So we don't live in an island anymore, although we are in an island, but we need to be mindful of what's happening around us. So just tell me the very recent one you all know. It's all in the news. What is the very recent one? Bangladesh issue, right? Unfortunately, we are much better than them. So they're still continuing the issue, right? So then so much so that the apparel companies are now trying to relocate till such time they finish their these unrest there to locally. So that it's actually not a good thing, but at least good for Sri Lanka, especially the condition that we are in now. Right? These are the kind of, if when we had the Aragale here, then again some of the suppliers were moving out of Sri Lanka and all of that. That also happened. So these disruptions can be internally and or external. Right. So tell me some international such disruptions that come to your mind. If you guys are watching at least BBC or CNN, at least you will see these things. And I suggest that all of you to look at that, at least if you don't read anything. Right? Watch. Yeah? Sorry? Yes, Ukraine-Russia war. It's a huge problem. They are somewhere there up north, but still we have an impact because Ukraine supplies 40% of the global wheat supply, and there are lots of precious metal they supply, and even energy supply to the Europe. Nord Stream pipeline was blasted by the Russian, and therefore they had a huge problem in Europe, especially in Germany for the energy, natural gas and all of that. They were They had to go back to fossil fuels. So all these issues can have a bearing on in the whole world. And now because of that, then Red Sea issue also, no? Right? What else? What is the Red Sea issue? Yeah, Israel went and attacked Gaza. So as a retaliation, you have these Ethiopian guerrillas, Houthi guerrillas. They always go, and they're pirates anyway. Certain parts of Africa, they just come and capture the vessels. And I don't know, you saw that how they, like a movie, that in a plane they landed on the ship and they captured a Israel flagged ship. And they are allowing the Chinese and some of the countries, Russian ships, sparing that, and rest of the things, yeah, capturing, right? So these things have a bearing. So when you have such a disruption, you can't go through that. You have to go around Cape of Good Hope. So it's like a very long distance that you have to travel. And one of the chip suppliers, the semiconductor wafer suppliers, was saying from Taiwan to Netherlands, normally it takes about 22 days or something. But because of this, they can't send it through Red Sea. Now it takes 34 days. Just imagine 10 days additionally. You have to plan, and the cost, fuel, the insurance aspects, the time taken, the inventory that you need to keep. So it's a huge burden. So the supply chain disruptions have become quite a normal thing now, one after the other. So we need to be mindful of that. And you can't say that, okay, we are not sending through there. But I know some of the tea suppliers, one day, one of my students was saying they have to now plan 14-day delay. So at least 7 to 14 day ahead of time. So their lead time has gone, extended. They're supplying from here to Europe, and like almost 7 to 10 days, extra days they have to plan. So it's additional time, means additional cost, because inventory you have to buffer it up. And they, on the other hand, the suppliers also will have to keep inventory, because when you take a long time, in case if it doesn't come, they will have to do that. In addition to that, you incur additional cost for freight because of the risk involved. When Sri Lanka had this terrorism issue at that time, the Lloyd's insurance put a huge penalty, the surcharge. So coming to Sri Lanka was a risk to many, many shipping companies. So we had to, they had to take an insurance premium, which is over and above the normal insurance. So like that now, higher insurance premium, fuel, the time taken, inventory, all those are burdens to supply chains and companies. Right. So today what we are going to learn, the learning outcome is you will identify and address potential vulnerabilities. Not everything can be risky, but you need to identify weak points in your supply chain and how to reduce the impact. You may not be able to 100% remove the risk, but at least if you know what are the weak points, the vulnerabilities, before it really breaks and prevent the movement, how do you really identify it proactively and then look at the mitigatory measures so that company can continue the business, kind of a business continuity plan. So how many of you have a business continuity plan in your company? Okay, good, one person. Two. Yeah, only two in the class. So this is the case actually. Even when COVID hit, pandemic hit the whole world, I think Dun and Bradstreet did a study, and they found out that even Fortune 500 companies, 94 or 95% of the companies didn't know beyond their tier 1 supply. So that means you haven't really done a proper risk assessment with your suppliers, right? So if you don't know from where you're getting your stuff, when something goes wrong, you will have a vacuum and black hole kind of thing. You don't know what's happening, right? So you need to do a proper understanding, have a good understanding about from where you're coming, what are the weak linkages. So much so that now they're saying even your shipping line, you should not use the same shipping route because things can go wrong. So you need to keep changing and understanding. So these kind of things were never heard of earlier, right? You look at the most closest and the cheapest and all of that. So now the experts are now saying after the pandemic and all this Red Sea issue and all of that, you need to now look at, very extraordinary measures to look at how to de-risk your supply chain. Maybe it may be costly, but you need to look at what kind of risk appetite that you have in the company to invest in these options available so that you can make your supply chain, less vulnerable. Right? So you see, like on this side, left-hand side, you see supply chain seems to be very straightforward, like kind of looks seem linear there. You have suppliers, you have different transportation modes, you have different distribution networks, you have different ways to distribute, or the consumers will have different places to go and buy your product. So seems very simple, but when you really look at the internationalization of supply chains, what you may actually see lots of complications like what we discussed, right? What happens even in Panama Canal? I know what happened in Panama Canal. You know where Panama Canal is? Yeah, where? Where is Panama? Geography that name. Yeah, where is Panama? Which continent? Yeah, Latin America. Okay. So the Panama Canal, what happened? Big issue happened actually in the last few. Yeah, it got dried. Certain parts of the year, it gets dried. It's like the Suez Canal. One ship got ever given ship got blocked. So like that, Panama Canal gets dried up. When it gets dried up, the ships can't move. So the moment it starts to, the weather starts changing, you should read it beforehand, before it gets into the, so when the you have to, when the water is somewhere here, you need to start working on it, rather than, when you feel drown yourself, right? So we need to know, so what happens in different parts of the world has a bearing on you. So many things that can happen. So supply chains, although seems very simple, because of the globalization and internationalization, has brought in a lot of complications. And you can't sometimes predict, because everything is linked to each other. Because we source components from different parts of the world, disruptions can happen. Economic situation in different parts of the world can have a bearing on your supply chain. And even in your own country, bankruptcy, and we had a lot of foreign exchange issues earlier. Lots of things can impact supply chains. So we need to really proactively read these triggering points. That's what is important. Because now this is going to be the new normal that we are experiencing. So if you look at these top global latest risks published by World Economic Forum, and they discuss this in Davos, Switzerland, all these top economics leaders and the political leaders, they go there and discuss what really impacts the world. And they publish a lot of things, and World Economic Forum publishes a lot of good things about future skills, and they discuss many things, right? So one of the things they discuss now is the global risks, and they publish this. And if you look at this, pick the supply chain related risk, directly supply chain related risks there. There are a lot of things, although they haven't mentioned supply chain, there are a lot of implications from others also indirectly. But if you look at here, out of the 20, I think there are 21. 20 risks they have highlighted. Out of that, there are how many supply chain related risks? Yeah. So you have disrupted supply chains for critical goods and resources, because this was mainly because of the chip issue that globally everybody experienced, semiconductor wafers and all of that, because of the Ukraine war and all of that, right? Then you had disrupted supply chains of food. Food security is a big issue now in the world, right? Even in Sri Lanka, although we don't have famine like in Africa. And there was another one here. Yeah, disrupt the supply chains for energy. Again, energy, there is a huge crisis, and very soon there will be a water crisis also, because the whole world is having scarcity in water, and Sri Lanka is one of the countries which will get impacted soon. So the future wars will be fought for water, right? So I was posted to in Bangalore in my former workplace at Unilever, and I remember Bangalore and Chennai, they had a river called Kaveri River. So there are fights between the two states, because one fellow closes the river and they don't get water. The other side will then fight, and there are issues. I mean, within the country, within states, you have problems. So one time of the year, there is huge problem and protests and all of that, because farmers downside will not have, because the water, Kaveri River, they will close it, and then you will not have sluice gates and all of that, then they will not get water. So like that globally, now not for anything else, now they will fight for water, because that's important for your survival. So these are the things that we need to be mindful, and also even the other things. When extreme weather, even societal and political polarization, what's happening in Bangladesh, a classic example, supply chain gets disrupted, although it's not identified like that. So there are many things that's happening that they have identified which can disrupt the world, and you need to be mindful are related to supply chain, indirectly or directly. So we have to take note of these things. The first thing is you must know what's happening around us before you look at whether it's going to have an implication to your operation. If you are, all of us are in a globalized environment. I mean, none of the countries are self-sufficient, and it is not needed actually, because you don't have the core competency in everything to do everything by yourself, right? So you are dependent on another supply chain from another part of the world. So you are impacted, right? So the only way to look at that is how do we really understand the vulnerabilities in our supply chain, and what are the things I can take, actions that I can take to mitigate these risks, right? So it is said that we live in some time ago, we used to call it, we live in a VUCA world, right? So you know what VUCA is, right? What is VUCA? V is what? Yeah, what? Volatile. U is for what? Uncertain. C for complexity, and A for ambiguity. Now, this was something that was developed during the Cold War between Russia and the US, right? So now the things that are happening now and experienced by us now, it doesn't actually address the issues that we are currently experiencing. We live in a chaotic world now, right? Back to back things are happening. So I forget again, do a search and check me, remind me what this Barney World guy who he's an US anthropologist and a author also. Just do a search and tell me, I forget now. I don't remember names now because maybe I'm getting old and I can't remember. I have my notes there, but I can't. What is this? What's his name?
No. That's
Barney World, the guy founded by this guy. What's his name? Yeah, just check, but no, not Barney Berry. There's another guy, right? American anthropologist, right? So he actually in 2018, 19, because of the disruption and it's getting very, very chaotic, identify this world called Barney World, right? Now we don't live in a VUCA world because that aspect is not relevant in the current context that we are experiencing. So you may have listened to this Casio or somebody guy. Yes. Yes, James Casio, right? He's an anthropologist and an author. So he actually coined this in 2017-18 period. And he identified that the world we living in is brittle, breaks easily, because back-to-back things are happening, right? Things can collapse. COVID was such an example. The whole world collapsed like glass. It is brittle, right? And A is for what? Very anxious. Remember during COVID, all of us were confined to home, working from home, and especially women had to have the triple burden. You had to work. If you're working professional, you work, then you cook, can do everything. Maybe you have a small house and do all these Zoom meetings and all of that, and husband is in the same room or whatever. So I know one guy who he worked in a financial research organization, and he had said, I can't work from home. Can you please get special advice, special approval for me to come and work during COVID? So the company didn't really understand why this guy was insisting that he had to come to work, especially during COVID, and you can't just go to work. Also, no, you had to get approval and all of that. Later on, the HR just had a chat with this guy, and then he had said he has only one sitting area, dining area. So there is one TV. He has grandparents also living with them. So the grandparents from morning to evening watching all these teledramas, loudly TV, and he doesn't have another room, especially to quietly listen to all the, use the computer and be part of this. So he was very stressful. So he really wanted to be away from all of that and come to work. They got approval. So I'm just saying the mental agony that people went through, and especially during that time, it was so difficult. if you look at companies had to look at this aspect, you know, and humans are social animals, right? We need to interact. Even while commuting to work, you talk to people or the phone, or you just have some breathing space away from home. So you need to interact with people, and when you have so much disruption happening, and you have to do work, and small kids are crawling and underneath and coming and trying to show their face, all those issues are there, and this is very, very difficult for everybody, and especially men don't see these things that is happening in the house, and they get stressed out because they see like the wife can't now do everything, and now you have to work and all of that. So lots of challenging situations, right? So this is the kind of situation because of the Barney world. So anxious moments, we had to look at human mental health also was very important. Now we need to really look at that, how it impacts, right? I think one of the, again, tech companies, Amazon or Apple or one of the Microsoft, they have actually found out those who are coders, they're like always in the computer, punching. And there is a lot of issues with mental health now because you are individually working, and now more and more companies are moving into the tech space. And in that, you're just individually working in front of a computer, and there is a lot of mental health issues. So they are also looking at how to really break that monotony and then bring them into a different. So that's why some of these companies having different nice open nice offices. You have billiard boards, you have spas and various things inside the office itself. And in Sri Lanka also now they're going to open another open workspace like that. Elements, you must be knowing. Elements is opening another one called Optimist down Wall Road. It's amazing. It's so mind-boggling to see how they have like a forest also in the building. You have it's very nice. So next year they're going to open up. So now they're doing that because especially for these new up and coming companies, and they need to really give that kind of space. Probably maybe because of that, because you like that kind, especially the new generation. Now we have intergenerational people working in organizations, so young people will require different ways, so we need to tap into that sweet spot. So you need to understand that. So anxiousness is an issue, and we need to tackle that issue. Then you have what N is what, it's not linear anymore. You can't even fathom. It's all like crisscrossing, things are happening, and very incomprehensible. Right? So this is the world we live in. So this is actually facing the age of chaos, right? So we need to understand these aspects and see how we need to really look at the impact of these disruptions happening around us. So I just listed out few things that happened in the last um, few years, starting with the 2020-21, the pandemic and all of that. See, some of it is more US centric, but I updated the recent one, the Red Sea crisis, the ship getting caught by the Houthi guerrillas, MSC ship, Baltimore bridge collapse in the US, ship went and the whole bridge collapsed, and then Panama Canal drought. So lots of things. Just imagine within a space of 2-3 years, so many things before you even try to come out of a disruption. Another thing is happening. You need some breathing space for you to come out of it, but then it doesn't happen like that. So this is the new norm. So accept this. Right? We can't change anything now. What's happening is around the world is like this because of complexities. Right? And then therefore, we need to see how to maneuver through in this chaotic world that we live in. Looking at the people aspect of it, looking at the process aspect of it, looking at other technological usage of that. How do we really come out of these risks that are impacting us? Again, I wanted to show you this side similar. Something happened in the US, but you need to understand the impact. You need to know the impact. Now, do we know the impact that tsunami in 2004, what was the value? How much of, if your economy was totally come to a standstill, what was the impact of tsunami, right? So like that, if they have quantified the estimated loss for the US is prone to a lot of hurricanes, right? So each and every loss in $1 billion, and how much time it took to recover. Later on, I'll talk about the time to recover is one KPI for the resilience of a supply chain. How robust and strong your supply chain is, how quickly you can come back on track, right? So now this is, they have quantified and see the impact it can make. Just imagine in a company, there's a fire and suddenly the whole factory comes, flat. And then how quickly can you start supplying to the market? Have you thought about it? This can happen. I know a big company happened like that, right? And they quickly got back on track, a multinational, but they quickly got back on track. No, you need to do your homework. That's why you need to have a business continuity plan. What if scenarios? What if this happens? What is the plan A, plan B, plan C? What if this happens? So you need to brainstorm with everybody in the company, specifically functionally and all that. And then overall, you look at prioritization, look at the company risks, right? I'm only talking about supply chain related risk. So ideally, you should do it for the entire company, all the functions and all the areas. And you have a risk matrix. And most companies who are in the stock exchange, they have these nice glossy reports which has all these risks identified and all of that. So they must be doing it really properly. But you need to really understand that if you want to see, go to the CSC website, and some of these public quoted companies has these things, so that you will understand how companies are really putting mitigatory measures in place to have these things identified, and they have to disclose to the shareholders because it's shareholders' money that they're managing, right? So they need to give confidence to the shareholders. My company is fully managed in a more safe manner. My money is safe, right? So you must give that confidence, right? Like the financial security, all that has to be looked at, right? So the best way, as I mentioned to you, to understand what supply chain does is to experience disruption, right? And these days we hear a lot. Our president is talking about, if not for me, we will be still staying in the queues, right? But supply chain is actually uniquely positioned to drive a value during uncertainty, because that's an opportunity actually. That's an opportunity for you to really relook at the supply chain and see how we can come out of it. Because that will help you to relook at what's happening. What are the vulnerable points in your supply chain, which you may not have thought about it earlier, right? So supply chains can be a source of strength as well as a vulnerability. So you need to know what are the weak linkages, right? Now earlier, the consumers were focusing mostly on three things, the ones that are on the orange part of the circles there, right? So consumers are normally looking at quality, cost, and then what? Whether when you go to the shop, the stocks should be available. So timeliness of delivery, availability. Those were things that we normally used to do before all this chaotic situation is getting, very repetitively happening now. So Gartner, Gartner, no? Gartner company, the Magic Quadrant IT research and all of that company, and they also publish top 25 supply chains of the world annually. So they now identified it's not only quality, cost, and service. You need to also look at, sustainability, because climate emergencies are also happening back to back now. I mean, we are experiencing in Sri Lanka the prolonged rains, prolonged droughts, so there are lots of issues. So the sustainability, and also you have to be agile. You have to quickly respond to the demand or the disruptions that we are having, right? And also you have to look at resilience. How? So what do you mean by resilience? What do you mean by resilience? Yeah? Yes. Ability to withstand any disruption. How robust your supply chain is, right? How robust your supply chain is. So you need to now look at all these three things also, in addition to your basic things that you used to look at. Quality, timeliness or the availability, and also the cost. In addition to that, in this chaotic world we live in now, we need to also look at how vulnerable your supply chain and put in measures in place to make your supply chain robust, right? Withstand all these pressures around us. And also you have to be quickly respond to the demand in the marketplace by being agile. And also you have to take note of sustainability issues that we are having. So why supply chains become so vulnerable is because in the past, before COVID, I mean, all of us are very fanatic about cost, right? Cost, cost, cost. That's the only mantra that company talks about, and that's the only language that they understand. So therefore, everyone, now there's nothing bad about it, but that is what we were focusing mostly. So we were looking at what? We were looking at efficiency. Therefore, we were looking at working with single suppliers or minimizing the suppliers, rationalizing the suppliers. Because when you work with few suppliers, you can leverage on scale. You can give big volume to them, they'll give you a discount. Right? But then at the expense of availability, something happens to that guy, like same way what happened to China. China became the factory of the world. When China got disrupted, the whole world got impacted. So you need to have a backup plan. So that was one reason. Okay, automatically කඩු කරන්න. That තුන class එක. Right? Right. Okay. Remove that. So then supply chains also became global. Now supply chains in a global environment. So what happens in one part of the world has a bearing on you. If everything was produced locally, we didn't have a problem. But now we are dependent on global sources, right? And we had certain companies will have centrally one place will deliver to the whole world, or you will distribute from one place like that. I remember in Unilever earlier, so we used to have a center of excellence kind of thing, or my company, different country clusters will be supplied by one place. So India used to do certain products. If you don't have a tariff advantage, you will not do that. But maybe hair products was coming from Thailand. So like that, we used to have like center of excellence. So they are specializing in that category because they have expertise on all of that. So they supply to the whole world for certain products. So you will also decide, okay, what is the best central location to distribute things. So you might set up something in Europe, you might set up something in Asia. So like that, when you do that, again, you're dependent. If something happens to that part, then you have an impact on your setup, right? And everybody started outsourcing also for cost reasons, passing the risk to somebody. But that also had a bearing on all these vulnerabilities. So when you have outsourcing, when you globalize supply chain, when you're focusing only on efficiencies, we had a problem in ensuring supply chain, smooth functioning of the supply chain, right? So this is the background. So I gave you a bit of background, why we had to understand this and learn this aspect. That's why I introduced this, because we are not talking about in supply chain this area now in the normal traditional supply chains, because now, because of the chaotic world we live in now, we need to address this. Unless you address this, you will be always in a disruptive environment, right? So let's learn a little bit of terminology so that you understand what is a risk, resilience, vulnerability, probability of occurrence, disruption, impact, all these things, right? So let's go into each and every area. So these are things when you have when you experience actually risks. So what does risk mean? You can read it clearly. I'm not going to go into each and every area. So when there is some uncertainty and discontinuity, your smooth flow will get impacted. If your supplier has or the market demand uncertainty, during COVID, we had issues. Consumers were not buying certain products. So we had a risk. Certainly, if company was banking on a particular product portfolio and that portfolio was not in the consideration set for the consumer, because they really now prioritizing their spend, right? Because of the issues that we are experiencing, COVID and then economic situation and all of that. So companies had to diversify. So you need to look at that, right? And many things can happen. Sometimes suddenly the supplier can have a disruption, or your factory will have some issue. So like that, many things can happen, right? Many things. So would anyone in the class would like to explain about a risk that you all experienced, and then how you respond to that situation? You said you have a business continuity plan in your company, right? So just would you like to share your experience?
We were developed, actually, this plan was developed very newly.
Okay.
Previously, we did not have such a plan.
Okay.
So when we were developing the business continuity plan, we had to mainly we focused on two areas. First, how to continue the production process, and then how to continue the engineering point of view.
Okay.
Like, because we had several ammonia plants. So
Sorry, if you don't mind, where are you working?
actually, this was my previous
Okay,
workplace,
but the company?
John Keels,
Okay.
Keels Food Products PLC.
Okay, yeah.
So there we had to consider several scenarios.
Cold chain, no? Cold chain is required.
Yes. So what to do when an ammonia plant is in breakdown and when the ammonia is in leakage? So
safety issue also, plus the
yes,
continuity issue.
yes. So in that case, then again, we did several practical stuff. How to continue the production with minimum effort,
Okay.
minimum requirements. So then several scenarios like that we had to.
Yeah. So you need to now see in a cold chain environment the material that you use to provide the temperature reduction is important. So in this case, they are using ammonia. So ammonia disruption happening to the system can, the whole cold chain can break down, right? Then your product will get spoiled also, right? So you can't operate anything. You can't produce anything because they do meat products and all of that. So how will you then produce that? Right? If you're in an ice cream factory, it's even more difficult because they have overrun. So they put a lot of air to get that fluffiness. So if the temperature, if the electricity breakdown happens, then the ice cream will become like a liquid. So then it cannot be again puffed up. You can't do that because from the system only it can be done. So like that, you have to really look at criticality of different stages of your process to understand what can go wrong. Right? Even your production fluctuations, demand fluctuations also can be a risk to the business. Because you have a certain strategic plan or a goal that you have target for a particular year, and year on year you expect a certain growth to happen, and then that fluctuation can really have an impact on your future of your business. So you need to know within what kind of bandwidth you can absorb that shock. If it goes beyond that, then you will have a warning signal. Then you need to have a backup way to catch up with the lost target that you have. So you need to look at each and every aspect. So there can be many reasons. There can be suddenly a fire hazard, or some like the ammonia leakage is bad for you, like health-wise also not good. So you need to make sure your system itself is idiot or foolproof so that it won't go wrong. So you have like alarm systems, preventive maintenance, all those things have to be looked at, right? So if the company doesn't have a robust system in place to evaluate your suppliers, all that customer priorities also can be a risk to the business. So there can be many risks. I've just listed out a few things. If you don't have a business continuity plan, of course, it's a huge risk to the company. So these are some of the risks. So I don't need to explain what risk is. You all know what a risk is. Yeah, you have a certain way of operating. Something comes and impacts you, then that's a risk for you. It will continue. It will actually have an impact on your continuation of the business, right? Right. So supply chain risks are the probability of any external or internal occurrence, right, which has the capability to disrupt the continuity of the supply, right? Risks can be anything that I mentioned, or maybe it's not an exhaustive list, I just listed out, right? So it can be, it can actually have a disruption. So risk management is how do you really manage those risks, right? Through coordination and collaboration with every partner in the supply chain. You cannot do it by yourself, because if you're if you think that supplier is a risk for you because it's a strategic supplier, maybe your competitor go and acquire that business. So you have a risk because they are a strategic supplier for you. So you need to look at all the stakeholders, partners in your supply chain, and collaborate and coordinate. So you need to involve, first you do it internally, externally. So you need to look at the extent of the risk that you have and then coordinate and manage it properly. So what are the vulnerabilities? Right? you're vulnerable now. You are vulnerable to COVID because you didn't cover your mask, cover your mouth with a mask, or you didn't wash your hands and you went into an area which you're not supposed to go. So like that in a supply chain, there can be weak linkages, which you need to identify, right? So if you don't take any notice, precautionary measures, it can go through your defenses and you might contract COVID or you might have a disruption in your company. So it is very important that you need to identify those vulnerable linkages in the supply chain, because supply chains are very long and complicated. It goes beyond the borders of your country, right? You may not know sometimes what's happening in that part of the world if you're not really having a global orientation or global mindset. So if you're a procurement person or a business development manager or somebody, international, whatever operation you're in charge, you need to know what's happening around us and see whether that can have an impact on your supply chain. So look at your vulnerabilities by looking at the weaknesses, whether there is any point of weaknesses that will be a possible threat. So because chain is strong as its weakest link. If there is one linkage, the whole thing will collapse and you can't operate. Right? That's what happened during the Ukraine-Russia war. And most of the automobile companies had to curtail production because the chips were not available. Right? And US had actually huge issue, especially in their defense area, because most of the equipments are now having some chip or the other, electronics. So you need that. And that wasn't there. So much so that US president at that time pushed those chip companies to come and set it up in the US. And now TCMS is one of the biggest suppliers who's supplying to all these big tech companies, especially the Apple and Samsung and all of that, based in Taiwan, is now setting up in the US because it's a security threat to the country. And that's why Joe Biden at that time, in his 100-day plan, when he took over in 2019 or 20, supply chain was top of the agenda, and he had a supply chain task force in their 100-day plan because they were impacted, right? So this I explained to you earlier. So this is why supply chains are vulnerable, because of the focus on efficiency versus effectiveness. And suppliers' base were reduced. We started outsourcing things, right? Supply chains are global. All that is impacting the supply chains. And that is why it is becoming. So the Cranfield University in the UK did a study and found out these vulnerabilities, why supply chains became vulnerable in the last so many years, because of these reasons. And that's why suddenly the peak point was the COVID. So the equation, if you look at the risk vulnerability into an unexpected event, is the supply chain risk. We need to understand these numbers. So I'll show you one of the situations that has impacted as an incident, which became a huge issue. I think last time when I mentioned about the 9 Rs, as part of the right way, I explained this. This is in Bangladesh. I think it was in 2008 or so. This happened. The whole building collapsed, and disturbing. If you're a faint-hearted person, close your eyes. Let's watch this video. Rana Plaza collapse and how supply chain got impacted.
I started the day normally like other days. Immediately, I take my camera and get there. I suddenly felt, am I in a war zone? I was hearing the scream from the rubble, someone saying, chop off my leg and pull me out. I stopped shooting. I was trying to help. Around 7:30, two volunteer worker called me and show me two dead bodies under the rubble. I saw the bodies kind of huddle each other, holding each other to survive. I started shooting again. I felt like these images should be the voice of these people who died. No one knows their story, how they survived making these clothes for first world country. There's no question the contribution of garment industry in Bangladesh in the economy, but it needs more good rules and regulation. I see the brand names all the time. The tags remind me the tags I have seen in Rana Plaza collapse. People don't want to pay more. So if you don't want to pay more, how the producer would pay more to the worker? So it's like the chain, start from the consumer and ends to the labor, Still a lot of people are missing. They didn't find their bodies. Somebody lost two daughter, two son, husband, wife, both. Who will take their responsibility?
See the impact of an incident and how these brands are getting exposed and highlighted at no point in paying compensation after the incident happened, right? So that's the issue. So these kind of so it's important to take note of it because sometimes these fast fashion is like cheap and it's bad for the environment as well. But all these companies are pushing really hard with these manufacturers to reduce cost, and per piece price is quite a pushing to a very lower level. And when it happens, manufacturers also have to look at a way to make profits too. So they also take shortcuts, right? So they just try to increase capacity by that particular building. The issue was that they in an unauthorized manner they increase they added different floors, and that couldn't withstand the full load there. And one fine day, the whole building collapsed with 1,000 odd people buried alive. It's one of the worst disasters that happened in the world, actually. From a human kind of point of view, not as a natural disaster. Tsunamis and all, we have had many incidents, but in the recent past. So this is what will happen. Disruptions can happen in many forms. Maybe it is a climate issue. Maybe it is this kind of a issue where you try to cater to the client's needs, and then you suddenly have this kind of disruption, which then have a huge period where you are unable to meet the demand. And these companies now start to relook at improving the infrastructure facilities in those apparel companies in this part of the world. And they're showing, those the high street fashion stores, and they are doing like this and pushing these guys. How can you produce it at this price? So this is how the world is moving, but we need to be mindful, because the bad publicity you get from a disruption can be even more. So the entire Bangladesh apparel industry, they had to really work together to identify such people who really do this kind of unauthorized operations and at the expense of the worker safety. And they had to really look at, and those companies also, client companies also had to really invest a lot of money to improve the infrastructure. So many brands, right? Top brands. And that's what can go wrong, right? Whether it can be a ship issue, or maybe a collapse happening in a building, or whatever. So these disruptions are unforeseen. You can't predict, isn't it? You can't predict. So therefore, it will disturb the normal flow. Now, who thought that some kind of a Aragale type of thing will happen in Bangladesh? Or Bangladesh is actually very recently, they actually overtook China also in certain areas, production. So that means it's going to be a huge issue for the companies, right? So companies also must understand any risk if you have. Now, this particular Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister, was in her 4th term. She was actually in the last term, she was acting in a very dictatorial manner and all of that. So then companies also must look at, okay, political stability. That was one of the risks in the World Economic Forum risks, political unrest and political instability in different parts of the world, right? So you need to proactively see whether there are any trigger points, risky situations that can happen in a country, also can have bearing on your source of supplies. That also have to be mindful, right? So it will actually disturb the normal movement of your supply, and that can really disrupt the supply chain, right? Then how to come out of it is to ensure that you have a business continuity plan, right? Because when there is a vulnerability, when there is a disruption, things will come to a standstill. Now, how do you come out of it? Now, you can't come out of it when it happens. You have to proactively do that. So you have to look at time to time, review and discuss your issues that can go wrong in your company, but you need to make sure that how do you really come out of it? By looking at different scenarios, right? How do we really look at a business continuity plan, right? By the way, I got some feedback that I'm going a bit fast. Is it difficult for you to absorb? Yeah? Yeah. So if I'm going fast and you guys can't understand, please raise your hand, right? Some time ago. So I just wanted to again come back with the whole purpose of if I don't give you the right space, the space for you to learn, it's of no use. So if you think that I'm moving a bit fast, so you can pause and say, I didn't understand. Unless you give me that feedback, I won't know. So I asked some of my known students to check with some of y'all. So that's why I got that feedback. I forgot to slow down. So I consciously slow down, but sometimes I forget. That's maybe one of the feedback I always get. I get carried away and I just go fast, right? So stop me. Some of it I talk about is like the incidents that happen, and those things are important for you to put the jigsaw puzzle together. Otherwise, theory alone will not give you that understanding. So you may think that I'm overwhelming you with a lot of incidents, but those things are important for you to understand this is the kind of world we live in, right? So complexity is the name of the game. So we need to understand how we really manage, okay? So what is business continuity? Is the process involved in creating a system of prevention and recovery from possible threats. So you need to carefully look at what can go wrong. Now that cannot be done from one individual. You need to do it as a team, brainstorming. Not only in a function, sometimes your function may require other functions involvement. Now, when I was in Unilever, I was the board member responsible for business continuity for the company. So I had to look at other functions also. So at the board meeting, we present quarterly. This is the action plan to come out of the issues that can go wrong. So there is a documented business continuity plan. There was who will do what by when is also clear cut. If there is a risk, that has to be removed. How quickly you will do depends on the amount of resources you have to de-risk that. The company at the board meeting, looking at the other constraints that you have, will have to take that call, right? So you need to debate it. You need to understand that you might prioritize, okay, this priority in this function may not be priority for us. Maybe this function is impacting the whole organization. So therefore, let's focus on this. So when you have many heads putting together and looking at a particular different scenarios, which will have bearing on the company operation, so you will be able, so you need to give the confidence to the board that these are the risks, but this is the action to come out of the risk. But immediately you can't do that, no. So till such time those risk is removed, you need to track it at the board. So that you have a action plan in place. When something goes wrong, you know who should do what. And it's like a push button stage. So it's just a matter of activating that plan when something goes wrong. But if you are not fully implemented that when some disruption happens, sorry.com thamai etakota. But if something is there and you have clearly articulated a plan, then you can activate that. So communication is very important. Making everybody understand those risks is important. Involving them so that they are risk aware, not averse. They should be aware of risk. Things can go wrong, yes, but we need to have mitigatory measures in place. Okay? We shouldn't be like this cartoon. I don't know if you can see that clearly. So we can't say, okay, we have no funding. So when something really hits you, you will be caught unaware of. So you need to take this seriously. In the world we live in now is so different, right? So this is the business as usual situation now, because any moment things can go wrong because of the complexity we have around us, right? I mean, very recently there was a big one in the IT space. What happened? What was that? Yes, airlines had to be grounded. What is that? CrowdStrike. That company did some updation and all the Microsoft users got impacted. Thousands are there. No, I think 500,000 or something flights globally got impacted. So cybersecurity threat is also another huge issue, right? Yes. A lot of scams are there. And I was at a board meeting few days back, and that company has really now looking at, now let's say when you're looking at suppliers, very often you move into most of the Chinese suppliers, right? So they're cheap. So we need to make sure that there are top tier good suppliers are there. There are some small suppliers, and some of these suppliers may not be having their factory even. And once actually the CEO was saying they had a spec and they just asked for quotations from their sources. And one Chinese company was really 100%, 100% matching that specification. So he had to go to Hong Kong and he said, okay, let's go and visit this supplier also and see across the border. It was closer to the Hong Kong border. When he went there, it was just a warehouse only, not a factory. And they had asked, okay, a few equipments were there. And he had asked, okay, where is the factory? Yeah, we don't have factory, but this is what it is. So he must be like a trader, no? Yeah, so there are such people also. So you need to have some authentication to check that. So if it's a supplier, because we ourselves get so many scam mails, no? Okay, transfer this money, your password has expired and all of that. It's exactly the same email, but one letter is missing. Sometimes when you're reading, I mean, human brain is such that when you see 2-3 letters, you'll think it's the correct name, right? sometimes there is one letter. So then they said, they found out, they closely scrutinized the supplier that supplier had one letter. So the supplier was saying, so now the company has implemented a system where if you're looking at a supplier hereafter, any part of the world, you have to first send a mail, call, WhatsApp, and also visit depending on the situation, because you have to look at, because things can be wrong, cyber security or whatever. So you need to have many factor authentications that whether these are real speaker sources. Things can go wrong after transferring funds. You might lose the money. Right? How many times people get caught to these scams? So in a company, it's going to be huge if you get caught. So these kind of things are also risks. So you have to have systems in place to verify and ensure that your company is de-risked, right? So this can be internal, external, or known or unknown, right? So when you are looking at it, you need to really look at these aspects, right? So internal risks, easy to identify, external, a bit difficult, known are easy, we all know, unknown difficult. That's what happened with COVID. Nobody thought COVID will become a global pandemic, right? So these are some of the common global supply chain risks that we are, anything that is very strange to you in this list, not an exhaustive list, but these are things that can happen, right? Right, you have disasters, quite common now, political unrest, we've seen already, forecasting error. So you can make a mistake in your forecasting, no? That can have a big issue, no? Internal issue, because you didn't have the right maybe expertise, or you didn't read what's the demand drivers, you really didn't have a good understanding about what's happening with the consumer behavior, macroeconomic conditions, many things can go wrong. But you didn't read it, and therefore wrong forecast continuously, then it result in a huge impact to your inventory and all of that, right? And we can also have issues in geopolitical. Give me an example of a geopolitical issue. What is geopolitics? Yeah? Politics in geographical means what? Sri Lanka is a geopolitical hotbed. Yeah? Everybody wants to come and have some own ports, or want to have some base. The US wants to have a base, or they want to do some, what do you call, yeah? Sorry? Yeah, Silk Route is that's Belt and Road. That's a different one. I'm saying geopolitics means now there are groupings formed. My allies, the US has anti-Chinese sentiment. So there is a different block happening now. You have the G20, and then you have now BRICS group, and a lot of different political groups are getting formed. And also Sri Lanka is in a very strategic location in the busiest east-west route. So everybody, because we are close to India, Russian wants to have a stake here, or the Chinese wants to have a stake here, India wants to have a stake here, Japanese want to. So like if you look at our port, all the international kind of thing, there is some partnership with all the countries, right? Adani Port in India, then you have CGT has some Maersk and another Hong Kong operation, then you have Chinese, Japanese now are trying to part of one port. So like that, you have everybody wants to be there to manage their own interests. So then it's going to be tough in managing business. On one fine day, maybe US will say, don't source it from this place. We had a problem because we source our crude oil from Iran, because our refinery use Iranian light crude oil or something, one of the variants that they have. Now, they had an embargo with Iran, and they said, no, you can't source from Iran. So we had a problem. So like that, the geopolitics also can have an impact. So there is a group supporting Russia, a group, Europe is supporting Ukraine. So different groups are being formed. So geopolitics will have a bearing, because security-wise, Sri Lanka is a nice place because it's connecting everybody. Everybody wants to have a stake in Sri Lanka, right? So like that, we need to also be mindful of these aspects which wasn't there earlier, right? Even price and currency fluctuations, we had issues no, with our exchange rate, the issues, we didn't have foreign currency reserves properly. All these things can be internal or external, known or unknown, risk can be there. Right. So during the COVID period, McKinsey company did a classification of the type of risks. So this is not the only classification. I just used it. If you want to look at that article, you do a search and you'll get this. So 2020, they did this classification and they identified risks as manageable surprises, right? Black swan risks, brewing storm, business challenges. So they looked at the probability of occurrence and the impact it makes to the business. High or low, high or low. Whether there is a high probability of occurrence or low probability of occurrence. Next slide, I have that. Next slide is that. I just wanted to explain this before I go to the next slide. So the 2x2 matrix in the next slide is what I'm explaining now. So manageable surprises is where it's difficult to anticipate, but manageable in terms of impact. So sometimes there can be certain things that can go wrong. You may not be able to anticipate, unknown, but you can manage it. Right? Let's say you have suddenly some industrial unrest in the factory, right? So you don't know when it will happen, but you can still read it, you know, when workers are right up in arms and work to rule and that kind of stuff. But suddenly, like when something goes wrong, you will be able to, if you have a proper backup plan, you can activate that plan and manage it. So it's manageable, right? Then black swan is, give me an example of a black swan situation. It's very hard to anticipate, but severe in impact. Normally swans are white, no? Black swans are very rare, right? So that's what it is. We experience a huge issue that is called a black swan effect. What is it? COVID is a black swan situation. Yeah. It's difficult to predict. Probability of occurrence was very, very low. We never had such a kind of pandemic. But the impact was so huge for the entire world. That is called a black swan effect. Brewing storm is something brewing. No, you know what is happening. You can predict. So you can prepare because you know when it's brewing, no, when the water is boiling, you know it's boiling and then you can act on it. So you can predict and act on it. Like example is like, so we all knew that Brexit will happen. You know what Brexit is, right? UK coming out of Europe. For the 2 years, they were talking about it. There was a referendum in the UK. So if you're exporting to UK, then earlier there was free ride across Europe. The moment they divorced, came out of it, then at the border controls, long queues. You have to do the customs clearance and all of that, and that's going to make your supply chain really, really complicated. So you don't wait till the cutoff date for that to happen, but you know that the referendum happened, the government want to do that, they plan and say after 2 years, by this is the soft cutoff, this is the hard cutoff, they have a time. You can work on it. So if you're supplying, now we're talking about supply chain. So if you're getting raw materials or you're sending there, or there's some value addition happening in the UK and sending to the different part of the Europe, then now you have a problem. You can plan for it earlier. If you know, because it's a brewing storm, you know it's happening. You have to take safeguards in that cutoff period for you to really, if you are supplying to the Europe, but you're having your distribution and in the UK, some value addition you do, and then you ship it out to the Europe. So there are companies who had problems. So can be anticipated, but will have a high impact once they materialize. It happened. Huge long queues, like for days and days. Even now they are having issues. The envisaged benefit from Brexit didn't happen. Right? So that's why they're talking about it. And then business challenges, we know typically low risk that can be anticipated and also managed quite easily. So I'm just showing you in this slide all the 4 things that I explained to you with some examples. So manageable surprise can be some supplier becoming bankrupt suddenly. Yeah. Localized conflict. Business challenge can be ability to anticipate is the probability part, right? Whether it's easy to predict or difficult to predict. This side is the impact to the company, magnitude and the risk, right? So the brewing storm example is Brexit or now US-China trade sanction and tax getting imposed by the end of this year. And that's why the shipping prices are increasing these days. Because all the clients in the US now advance taking huge loads from China to prevent paying. I mean, otherwise they'll after December, they'll have to pay. So they are buying in advance and doing that. So when you have a huge demand, obviously the shipping rates will increase, right? So same way like business challenge, day to day we know no, some labor dispute or regulatory change or changing customer requirements. So we are grappling with those day-to-day issues, which are anyway part of your day-to-day work that you have to anyway deal with. It's easy to do that because those are impact may not be major, maybe few days stoppage will happen, but you will know how to come out of it. But when this kind of thing happen, it's very difficult. And also impact is very high, but this you can prepare. So you have to put it into this, anything that you know, because risk, if you can't use the same methodology to tackle all the risks that you have in the company, there must be some methodology to divide into different boxes so that you can have different approaches to manage. Otherwise, if you had to look at, like now when company asks you to look at the risks, you will put all the risks, like maybe thousands of risks. Can any company do all this, manage those 1,000 risks? No. You have to put it into, that's the whole purpose of learning through an MBA. How do you do it? There is a tool to do that. This is the tool. Any other tool. This is one tool. So you can use it to some tool, using a tool to prioritize your risks. And you decide, I'm going to focus on this. This is going to be impacting more for me, my company. So I will prioritize this. So this kind of a 2x2 matrix, these are called typologies. These typologies will help you all to prioritize those risks so that it's easy. You have different interventions. Certain things you ignore. Certain things you will focus more. Certain things you can predict because it is noticed well ahead of time. Certain things you will, with a intervention, you will manage it, right? So like that you look at. So this is the first step in managing risks is develop a risk register. So form a team, brainstorm, identify what are the risks. What are the risks that you will have a disruption in your company? So list out. Then to prioritize, you use this kind of putting into the boxes. And then later on, we'll look at how to prioritize. Okay. Are you clear so far? Yeah? Yeah.
When it comes to the risk register,
Yeah.
when we prepare a risk register at the first time, so after some time, the risks can change, right?
Yes.
So from the practical scenario, is there any like recommended frequency to look at the?
Good point. Good point. So, I mean, this is not carved in stone. When you do an exercise once, that is not all what's going to happen. Because now that's why I said we are living in a banny world now. Things are changing and it's so chaotic. So time to time you need to review. That doesn't mean you have to read every month, but you need to at least annual review or biannual, depending on the disruptions or the issues that you are experiencing changes. So every time a situation changes, you need to revisit your plan that you have developed, whether that has a bearing on your risks register or the risk classification. It's very important because it's a no-brainer. Nothing is permanent. Things can change. What you identified as a top risk may not be the top risk after a year down the line. Maybe some new risk must have come. Now cyber security has become a big thing for supply chains. Shipping lines will get, ports cannot load anything now. Maersk had a huge issue some time back. So like that, things can go wrong suddenly and you haven't even thought about it, right? So you need to, that's why you need to have a global orientation. You must know what's happening, not only in supply chain, anything for that matter, at least watch news. We must know what's happening because we live in a globalized environment. You cannot, either you are staying in this country or you go overseas. If you don't have a global view on what's happening, you won't be able to go up the career ladder because everything is interrelated now. Everything that we do has a bearing on what's happening around the world. So we need to know, and don't only look at your phone and what you're getting, but please at least minimal watch the news. Then what you see what's happening, and then that will at least trigger, because those are things you need to do to sense the demand. Whether this incident can have an impact on my demand. The proactive companies are looking at those things. Big companies have people who are looking at world incidents, whether it has a bearing on your supplies. Right? So those are areas that you need to look at. That will actually know whether the prices are going up or not. Then you hedge against the price increases to buy things and block the stocks. And they are proactive and they will be ahead of the curve than the others. Right? So you need to know what's happening around us. Otherwise, you will not be able to proactively understand these aspects, right? Good question that you asked, yes. So we need to review. We need to call at least your business continuity plan, the risks, at least you present till such time all those actions are implemented quarterly at least. Annually, I feel, at least relook at the risk register and say whether the situation has changed or whether the priority has changed or the prioritization has changed, right? So the black swans are here. So we need to understand how it is. So there is a methodology and there's a framework for you to identify the risks. So the first thing, as I explained to you, first thing is identify the most relevant risks. So develop a risk register and identify whether those are realistic. And then you look at what can go wrong, possible outcome. You say supplier delays. What can happen to that? Because of a supplier disruption or a delay, what is the impact? Production, whatever, coming to a standstill or your volume, whatever. So you have to identify, that's why you need to have a cross-functional team, because you may not know everything, no? So if you're within supply chain, you need to involve the relevant people in the brainstorming session when you're developing that, right? Because supply chain functional risks, you will only know because you may not have a whole view on the supply chain. So you need to look at that. So you need to identify what are the options, the outcomes. And then you have to say, okay, what is it that I need to do to mitigate this risk, right? Whether I'm going to live with it, whether I'm going to pass this risk to somebody, whether I'm going to have some investment required to de-risk it. So like that, you have different outcomes that you will expect to mitigate that risk, right? And finally, once you do all of that, it has to be part of your normal day-to-day operation. It has to be incorporated and it has to be reviewed like normal operations, right? Then only if something goes wrong, you can quickly activate and do that. If it's not integrated into the normal business operation, when things go wrong, you might think, oh, it's a separate function who's doing the business continuity and you will but everybody must know when something goes wrong, what needs to be done. Because it's not that function who's set up to do that, but you have to activate by individual people. If there's a supply disruption, procurement people only do that. Some separate team might look at the whole exercise. In the involvement, they may coordinate, but actual action has to be done by the people concerned, right? So that's what is important. Now you know, like in some companies, quality management, there's a separate department for quality, right? Quality, is it everybody's responsibility or a functional responsibility? It's everybody's responsibility, because they will come and do audits. They will come and do training. They might do random sampling and all of that. But you're the one who's touching the product every day in the production line. So you have to be responsible for quality. It's everybody's responsibility. They will give you a helping hand and facilitate the quality by taking random samples, improvement areas and all of that. So like in a company, maybe company will assign a separate team to look at that, but they will do the coordination, listing, all that, prioritization and all of that. But the action has to be done by people. So if the people in the company don't know what it is, how will they activate the plan? So it's the responsible people in the line only, know if there is a fire in the factory manager and everybody should activate that. Not a separate team. So like that, individually, everybody should be clearly communicated. That's why I said everyone in the company be risk aware. The culture in the company should be risk aware culture, not a risk averse culture. You know, when you bring the bad news, you should not shoot the messenger. There is a risk in the company because of XYZ. So you must, welcome that issue and ask, why are you saying this? Okay, let's incorporate that into the plan. So maybe you might have to go into the workforce level. They may know something what can go wrong in a factory environment. So you might have to look at that. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. So let's look at the methodology. So again, another model. Anything that you do to manage the risk, you need to be prepared. Sorry, you need to prevent, right? You must have prevention measures. Then when something happens, you need to be prepared to activate your contingency plan. Then you need to respond it and recover. Quickly come back. So first of all, the same methodology, another way of looking at it. Establish the context that you're operating in the company. What are the risks for that situation? And analyze the risk, assess the risk, treat the risk, and monitor and evaluate. You don't see the lines here, sorry. So this is a connecting line here. Monitor the risk and keep reviewing it. Remember I said it has to be integrated into the company day-to-day operations. So this is called, easy to remember, PPRR model. It's another model, what I explained to you earlier, is in a easy to remember way that I have classified. So this is one of the important areas to how to do the risk identification and prioritization and de-risking process. So I just want to show you. So once you list out the risks, right? Once you list out the risk, now we need to, you might give a risk ID, maybe you code it, and then try to populate in this grid, right? So again, you have excess, this way is probability, this way the impact to the business because of the loss that you incur because of the issue. So you will put, so you may have listed out now, some things may be here, some things may be here. So if you're here, this is a significant risk zone. Maybe this may require prompt treatment, may require treatment. So like that, depending on where you are placing these risks based on the knowledge you have, the way you need to quickly prioritize will be easy to understand. Now, if things that are here, the red one should be your priority. Then the amber one. So like that, you need to have, once you populate these risks with those codes, you need to see how you bring it here, from here to here, here to here. What is it that you need to do? What is the cost that you have to incur in order to do that? That's why I showed you at the beginning that how much does the disruption has cost to a country or a business. Hurricane, whatever, or something, you know, it actually so many $1 billion, and it actually took 30 odd days to recover. So that is then if you have identified when there's a disruption, what is it that you have to incur? So whenever there's a disruption, you need to try to quantify that risk. For example, let's say you have a regular transporter that you normally use. One fine day, because of some poor planning by salespeople, you had to now dispatch a huge volume. So now you don't have enough capacity with your trucks, so you have to buy things from the market at a spot rate. So you have to, it's a risk to the business. No, you didn't plan it in the budget. It was not there. Now you're going and, incurring a huge cost by buying at the spot rate in the market. It's not a contracted price. So obviously when you will have to incur more. If it's a significant amount, it's a risk to the business. So you need to know what it is. You must quantify for the last 1 month. We had to incur X many number of trucks, which cost us ₹1,000,000, whatever, because of last minute deliveries or poor planning. So you need to quantify and show. Therefore, we need to have a proper SOP or a process in place in the company to prevent these last minute things, because anything can be planned. No? Sometimes the salespeople have a habit of working in the last minute to achieve their targets. So you need to, it's a common thing, common behavior, whichever the industry you're in. So you need to see, you need to respect each other's lead time, and you need to have some safeguards in place for a cutoff and all of that, because if you don't eat something for 3 weeks and in the last week you can't eat what you couldn't eat for the 3 weeks, no. Similarly, everybody has some capacity in their operations to manage. So you have to respect that. So we need to quantify that risk so that company also, it's easy to understand whether this is possible to do that, whether this is so impactful to the business, therefore I must do something about it. So it's important to understand, first step is here, you put everything there. Then depending on where the box is, here or here, sorry, where you are, whether you're here. So if you look at it into 4 boxes, right, rather than 3 by 3. So these are the things that you need to do. High probability, high impact. You need to prevent it happening somewhere over there. Right? So these are some examples I have mentioned here. So in the box, if you look at 2 by 2 kind of thing, if it's high probability and high impact, you must somehow or other prevent it. So example, as I mentioned to you, one of your competitors are also supplying in addition to you for one of your major competitors. And one of your suppliers are supplying to one of your major competitors as well. And that supplier is a strategic supplier to you. One fine day, your competitor acquire that supplier. Right? Then you don't know. You can't say you didn't know, no. Because very often you must also use business intelligence. And I'm assuming that you guys are going and visiting your supplier. Then you see your competitor is being done. Market information is very easy to find. Right? If you're not up to date with what's happening, you will be caught unaware. Right? So you need to know what's happening. And then if you don't do that, you will have suddenly you will have a problem. So therefore, if that is the only supplier, you need to also see if a competitor comes in and started sourcing from them, there will be a risk. You need to also see whether they'll negotiate and try to, sometimes we also say, no, don't source. You cannot supply to anybody if you want to be a strategic supplier. I have done that sometimes when I was doing sourcing. So you will try to put controls and say, we will give you the lion's share. We'll continue to buy you. I will sign up for a contract for the next 5 years, but you can't go to your competition. So sometimes if you're a valuable buyer, they might agree. And because you're strategically giving more volumes and all of that. But the moment you say one fine day they violate that and they go into competitor, then there's a risk for you. So you need to also see all these aspects. Right? So if there is a high probability and low impact events, high probability, low impact is here. High probability, low impact. So you are somewhere here. Right? You must contain that. Minimizing the chances that they occur. You try to contain. You can't fully eliminate. You will try to contain the impact. Right? This is a very stupid example I've given. Let's say you have like a factory where you have bulbs. Suddenly there is a tendency of those bulbs to break and all of that. So it's going to be messy and glass contamination can happen. So probably you might look at a stronger packaging, whatever. So you need to contain that happening depending on the impact that you have in the business, right? Then low probability, high impact, you try to plan how to handle if these arise, right? So your factory located in an area prone to flooding, every few decades, it's like a tsunami situation, low probability, high impact, right? So you went and set up your operation. You need to at least whatever level, flood level, getting into some alarming level, then before that you need to shift your stocks. So you have a plan in another location to act on it till such time the flood subsides. You need to have some plan in place, right? Then low probability, low impact, you accept it. No, don't waste your time on that because it's not worth it. There are other priorities in life. So such things you accept, right? So that's how you put the mitigatory measures in place. So this is how you do that kind of a documentation in a company, right? So risk response plan has to be clearly identified. So as I mentioned to you here, you have a risk ID. You have first when you brainstorm it, you have a list of risks that you have identified. You code it. You have ID so that you can easy to follow it up and populate that matrix. And then you identify the name, the description, the probability of occurrence, high, medium, or low, about magnitude of the impact to the business, high, medium, or low. So then based on that priority, then you will identify the root cause of the risk. Otherwise, you can't manage the risk. No, if you don't know why it is happening, the outcome has to be known, right? And then you need to have preventive actions and the contingency action. You may have preventive action, but if things go wrong, what will you do, right? And then who's responsible? Most important thing. Everything may not have the answer to the problem, no? So you have to identify and assign a person. The accountability is very clear. Which person in the company and whether it's a red flag or not. So you know whether it's a red zone action, X person X is responsible till such time it becomes red to amber or red to green. You need to track it at a high level at the board meeting review. So we used to do like that. So you need to track it, right? So the preventive measure means any risk response that occur before a harmful risk event happens. So it's like you feel you're a bit unfit. You annually go for a medical, not unfit. I mean, you want to be healthy and you go and get an annual medical checkup, right? So you regularly do that. So preventive maintenance that you do in companies, you do, you have a plan in place, you do a mock run, like a fire drill kind of thing you do in the company to see whether you have the proper safeguards in place, right? So if you're in quality, whatever, you can do, like you have an incident management team. So you activate the incident management plan, like to see in the event some recall happens, how will you manage it? So like that, you test your system. So that's first, you need to have a SOP in place and see whether that's effectively being happening. Like you don't wait something to happen, but you have a plan in place, you proactively look at it. It's like you don't wait till the machine breakdowns, that's reactive, but you have a preventive maintenance plan, right? Or predictive, now you have predictive analytics and all of that are there. So, and contingency is any risk response that occurs during or after a harmful risk. So if something goes wrong, while you may have preventive measures, things can still go wrong, and certain risks you will not try to eliminate because it's not worth the while to do that. Then if such a thing happens, what is it that you do? Have you identified those actions? How you will react to come back to normalcy? So that's what contingency means. So you need to have those also identified. And so we need to have this document defining known risks, including description, cost, likelihood, current status, costs, and proposed responses, and all of that. Because company also will take a decision whether I am going to live with this risk or whether I have funds to de-risk it. So that is the responsibility of the person who's proposing to see how much does it cost. Right? Yeah, complicated, the overdose. Yeah. I mean, if you think of it, you may think overwhelming sort of information, but it's a process. How to proactively identify risks. First list down, brainstorming risks, then identify the impact it can make, and you prioritize, and then have actions. That's all what you need to do, right? Otherwise, like in this cartoon, you will go around the circle. What do we do? What do we do? And some incident happens. Headless chickens, like headless chicken, right? We cannot be in a situation like this in a complicated world that we live in now. It's chaotic. So for ease of understanding, all what I explained earlier, the risk response plan can be identified with these 4 T's. So the risk matrix, I put it into a 2x2 for ease of understanding, right? So impact, probability. So if both are low, You tolerate it. Don't do anything about it, not worth. Right? If impact is high, probability of occurrence low, you transfer it. Give me an example of what can be done for transferring the risk. Yeah, we take an insurance policy or we outsource it. Its problem is not with us, somebody else. So you have proper contracts, you have insurance. Why you do that? It may not happen at all, but still you, to be on the safe side, you take an insurance. Or you outsource it. Then there again risk is passed on to somebody. Right? Again, you outsource it for a specific reasons. When do you outsource? When it is not your core competency. But at the same time, it will also reduce your cost and pass the risk to others also. Because that's their core business. Therefore, they know how to manage it better than you. Therefore, you pass the risk because you have a bigger risk if you try to do it by yourself because you don't know how to do it properly, like experts. Right? So you pass the risk. So treat it meaning probability high, impact less. So you don't need to really, you have to plan for it. So maybe with your suppliers, you have clear contract and a service level agreement. Right? So kind of autopilot, you can manage it because you have to carefully think about it. SLA I have mentioned as that, service level agreement, so that you make sure that your interests are safeguarded. Right? So you safeguard your interests and therefore treating means probability is high, but the impact is low. So the most important thing that you need to really look at is if it's a high impact risk, terminate, both sides high. Probability is also high. So terminate means you have to quickly have proper safeguards in place. You have to invest time to prevent it happening again. So you need to propose to the company board, okay, for me, we are here. If this gets disrupted, because both high, impact to business is very high. So if something happens, maybe you have had a past experience, you know what was the loss to turnover, whatever disruption, you may be having some quantified numbers, then you say this was the impact that we had. Now I'm asking to de-risk by doing this, right? So you will have to have some guesstimated figure, maybe working with finance and all of that to convince the board. They may say, okay, no, my risk appetite is not that. So we'll look at how it is, but you need to see either you treat, either tolerate, or you transfer or terminate. You have to terminate and get rid of it if both are high. Very important, right? So here I'm putting here, transfer, terminate. So both are high mean terminate. So let's do a small exercise in the groups, right? So develop a risk register. I mean, in the interest of time, you can do a lot, half an hour more. So quickly spend about 5-10 minutes in your groups. Identify, develop a risk register, company supply chain of your choice, and prioritize the risks to identify. So don't go into mitigatory measures, just develop a risk. Identify a company, maybe in your own groups, you can work together. So maybe you can work together. So just I'll randomly pick a group and ask what you have done. So list out the risks, possible risks, and prioritize. That's what I'm asking you to do. And I have an exercise at the end as a homework for your own thing. Don't ignore these exercises. Some exam questions will be something around these. So if you do it in the class, then I can tell you whether you're right or wrong. So it will help you. Not the same way, but around that I'll give questions. Right? Okay. Are you clear? Brainstorm, identify a company or whatever situation, list out the risks and prioritize. That's all. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Mama garwangi first. Here. Okay. List out and prioritize. That's all I'm looking for. Are you all okay? You may not be able to write a lot of risks, but at least 3-4 risks if you identify in the next 5 minutes or so, that's good enough. Okay, let's hear from you all. I think people at the back. Yeah. Can you all just mention about the risks that you have identified? Did you specifically identify a company? Last. Then what are the risks that you all have identified? Yeah? Anita diha බලන්න එපා. Can you stand up a bit because otherwise mic එක උච්චර දුරට යන්න ගියොත් එළි වෙනවනේ. Wait. Yeah? Yeah, pass it on. Yeah. Let's hear from the back benchers first. Yeah. Yes. You can, yeah.
Risk in transporting goods.
Like 2-3 years back, but now it's
Now,
already there.
yes. You don't need to, yeah. If that's an issue for you because of the current economic disposable income has come down, therefore your customers are now dropping the demand, and they're now the low unit packs and all of people they're not like luxury top end products. They don't now slowly picking up. But if that is relevant for you, you take it. Otherwise, you just don't take it. Don't take very broad ones. Yeah, Mukadda? Just a minute. There. Okay. Business challenge. It's a business challenge because economy can be, of course, getting into bankruptcy is a slightly bigger impact. So then maybe high impact opportunity. No, not that. One is probability of occurrence is low. Yeah, actually, if you look at it, it's bankrupt. Economy becoming slowdown is a different thing, but country becoming bankrupt is a serious thing. Then it can come there because it doesn't happen very regularly, no. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, mention. Let's listen to him. Yeah. Talk a bit louder. Keep it closer.
Risk in transporting materials.
Okay.
Example for transporting materials through sea freight, and a
Okay.
disaster can occur.
Okay.
Materials can be damaged,
Yeah.
lost in sea, and problems occur in custom clearance
Okay.
that can also affect the supply chain. And during the transport as well as when in inland transport, and that's all.
So how do you prioritize that? Now, some things are, what are the things that are business as usual things? Custom delay is a business as usual. Customs is not releasing things on time.
Having
So you-
more than one source
Yes,
to
that is
import
true.
goods.
Maybe the shipping route also. Maybe you're following now because of the disruption happening around the world. If you use the same route, maybe you'll have to pick up. So, I mean, there are a lot of different schools of thoughts now. I mean, using the same route, the most optimal route will give you better cost advantage, but that will be risky if in a very chaotic world that we live in, right? So alternative suppliers, we can't have an alternative source for customs. No, they are there for us. We have to have a way to manage. Now, recently they identified 31 companies for authorized economic operators. So if you as a company is really doing things in governance is right, you don't pay bribes and you do things properly, processes are in place, you don't under invoice and all of that, you've been identified like that. So only way to get into the good books of that is being part of something like that. You get a green channel kind of thing. Tier 1, now there's another level it seems. So like that, you have to look at ways and means to overcome the customs issues also. Because why you have a custom issue is you are checking each and every shipment through there. But if you become authorized economic operator, then you don't need to. Right? So you work towards putting processes in place in the company that you are a very responsible company so that they will bring you to a different level. Then your shipments won't be checked. Okay? That's a mitigatory measure. I didn't ask you all to do that. Any other group who would like to talk about? Yeah, your group. I picked you guys. Yeah. Right. You do it, yeah. Keep it closer.
Fluctuations. The impact is when importing products it might be hard if your foreign reserves are low.
Mm.
So hard in opening LCs and doing the transactions.
Okay. What is the other risk?
So we were looking at more or less where there was like a prolonged power cut and power failure. Those that time there were a lot of machinery. What do you call? Lot of lead time because the machinery takes up time to heat, and then once the power cut is done, that whole heating time is gone.
Mm.
So
So again, don't when you have to look at something, don't look at historical stuff. You have to look at the current situation, right? Current situation. I expected you all to look at the current situation, and in the sense now COVID is not there. Although I gave a lot of examples to easily link up to the issue and easy for you to understand. But when you all working as doing a risk assessment for the company, you have to look at that, but taking learnings from the past issues also. Right. So I hope you got some insights as to how to do that. May not be you are the only one who's doing that in the company. Maybe you will have to do it with a team. So therefore, you will get a more enriched risk register because there are experts who will know more about different risks in the company, and there will be some facilitation that will happen at a higher level in the board, right? Okay, so let's come back again. Few more things to explain about what to look at. So now we looked at risks, we looked at prioritization, we now know where the vulnerabilities are in the supply chain, therefore you need to de-risk it. Now, how do business continuity plan is in place? We need to now see how do we know whether your company is having a very robust supply chain. So Michigan State University has defined this from using this supply chain resilience tree, right? So what is resilience is how do you make your supply chain robust, right? So it's as organizations' ability to sense and respond to emerging risks could be termed as resilience. So you should be able to sense and respond. Quickly respond, and you must know the triggering mechanisms, situations, and you can quickly, because you have business continuity plan in place. Now, if you have a good resilience in the company, the two aspects that you will look at is your ability to resist to such a risk can be higher. And also resisting is one thing, but recovery, come back to normalcy is another thing. So when you say resistance, two aspects: avoidance as well as containment. Remember the 4 T's also, certain things you try to avoid means termination. Try to somehow that, because high impact, high probability ones, you have to somehow or other avoid it. But there are certain things, impact is high, probability is low, but you might have to look at contain it. Not become a huge, entire company should not get impacted. So when you look at these aspects, you say that your company is high resistance capacity. Similarly, again, the COVID, I'm keep using the COVID examples. You are protecting yourself, you are taking all the vitamin C, you are taking all the spare hours, whatever that they say, it will build your immunity, you keep on taking it, so you develop your resistance capacity. For some fluke reason, you were vulnerable on a particular day, you quickly got it, but because you had the resistance capacity, you didn't have to go through this whole sickness for so many years, it didn't go into oxygen low level. So you were able to recover fast. So your ability to put systems in place, even if it goes through your defenses and penetrate to the company, you will be able to quickly come back on track because you have put in your systems in place. That's what it means by recovery. Right? The resistance capacity, because you can contain and then you can recover quickly. Recovery meaning stabilization and return. So when you are in a particular, and I draw it, you will be able to understand easily. Right? So here what they talk about is, again, the MIT together with Accenture has developed a test for resilience. How resilient your company, unfortunately, I have no access to that article, but there is a test to test whether your company is how resilient is. Then you can take precautionary measures. It's like you go for exercise SCG. You feel you are getting a small heart attack, doctor will ask you to do a stress ECG because whether you're vulnerable. So you go on the treadmill and see whether you pass that or not. Similarly, supply chains also has to go through this resilience test because of these common things that are happening constantly to see whether you're vulnerable or not. So you can watch this YouTube video who talks about in a webinar, how this can be done and the measures that you can look at it, right? So what happens is, let's say you are in a situation like this, you are operating at a particular level. At this particular level, when you're operating, suddenly you're meet with a risk, right? Now, when something happens, let's say you suddenly, your supplier become bankrupt, or maybe suddenly some Red Sea impact is coming onto you. So you are, because of that risks, you're operating at a particular level. Now suddenly you're coming down, disruption, and to what degree that you go down will determine how resilient your supply chain is, right? And then you come down impacted, but you don't go down and hit the rock bottom, but you quickly then come back. How much time it takes to recover? Do you take such a long time? Or you do it like this? So the time it takes for you to recover is lower here than this. If you look at here, it takes a long time. So this supply chain is more robust and resilient than this because it takes a long time for it to recover. Recovery also, you may not come down to this level, right? You may settle at this level because now you have got impacted. Your position has got weakened. Maybe you are settling at a lower level. Maybe sometimes some companies, they really bounce back fast and then they even become having a better performance than what they were there, right? So there are a lot of extensive research that has been done on how companies are bouncing back if your resilience is high. So it is important to understand these two aspects: time to recover, TTR, and time to survive. Time to survive, time to recover and survive. Recover means you go down, quickly come back on track, and then survive meaning whether you're finally stabilizing at a above level or below level or the same level. It's important to understand, right? So this box shows if your resistance capacity is high and recovery capacity is also high, you become a very hardy supply chain, very robust, fully strong supply chain. If you have higher resistance capacity as well as higher recovery capacity. But if your resistance capacity is low, recovery capacity is low, you become very fragile. Anytime if something happens, you collapse. That's not the place that you want to be, right? If your resistance capacity is high, recovery capacity is low, meaning if something happens, you resist. But when it comes through your defenses, you become hit rock bottom. So you might resist, but you might go and hit rock bottom and it takes a long time for you to recover. And if your resistance capacity is low, recovery capacity is high, you are very vulnerable because resistance, you cannot resist. It will come through. And then recovery, because although it comes through your defenses, you are able to quickly come back on track and bounce back. So there are different supply chains. So when you do that test, they will put you into a box and then you will know how strong or weak or vulnerable that your supply chain is. So don't get confused with this. Just want to show you there are such things that exist to check whether your supply chain is strong or not. I'm not going to ask you to remember this and by heart it and download it at the exam. No, I won't. But I want you to, if I ask, how do you know that a company is having a robust supply chain? You should be able to give examples as to what is it that you need to do to make your supply chain robust. I'll be always, even Dr. Ravis and myself, always try, ask you all to write with examples, practical answers. So always try to relate. That's why I gave a lot of examples, hoping that you guys pick something or use your own examples when you're writing. Then we know that you know how to apply. Theory alone will not get you anywhere, but theory with practice, with examples will help you to learn from it and implement back in your workplace, right? So same what we expect in the exam as well. So what I explained to you, I have highlighted here. So how can you, to what extent you can stretch your supply chain without breaking, right? So these are the ways, how do we track the resilience is through time to survive, time to recover, and time to thrive. So time to survive meaning when something happens, how quickly, how long does it take to reopen the business? So you got impacted because of COVID, and how long did it take for you to start the business? Or you had a fire in your factory, everything was gutted. Now, how many days it took for you to start the operation? So how long did it take for you to survive? Time to survive. That's the first thing. You may get impacted, but how much time it took for you to start the business? When you start the business, you have a backlog to clear now because you were not operational for some time. So then you need to, first step is to clear the backlog because you were not operating for some time. So how long does it take to recover the backlog? That's called time to recover. Go back to this level. So you're here, now you got hit. How much time it took for you to get into that level, right? Time to thrive is, you cleared the backlog, now you're going back on track. Any order that you come, you can manage it, right? How are we doing better post the event or the crisis that hit you? So your ability to quickly bounce back and start catering to the actual demand in the marketplace through your supplies tell you whether you are able to quickly thrive and continue the business. So these are some of the metrics or the KPIs that we can use to test after. So the way to achieve this is to look at the methodology that we discussed. Risk register, all of that, right? And prioritization, mitigatory measures, business continuity plan, all that when you have it, you can quickly come back on track because these timing has to be checked. So how robust your action plans will determine how quickly you can survive, how quickly you can recover, how quickly you can thrive. So finally, proof of the pudding is in the eating. The time taken for you to come back on track finally will determine how well you have put your mitigatory measures in place. Clear? Yeah, clear? Yes. Yes.
Factory managers. So who is responsible for?
See, finally, company's business continuity plan, finally the board has to be responsible. No, finally, company board has to, if the company doesn't function and it is cannot be continuously operating, sustenance is impacted, board is responsible. You have a CEO executing the board's mandate, you know, that CEO is responsible. But you have operational heads, no? You know, those operational heads are the ones who really day-to-day look. So they have to help the CEO to ensure this and commit to the board. That's how the structure operates. So that's why I said each function has to have the, now I am only because I'm talking about supply chain, I'm telling about supply chain ones. But other functional people also have to look at it. So when I was responsible for business continuity for the company, I was not only looking at my team, but I'm looking at others. So I had to facilitate others' risks and process had to continue to present to the board. Board will prioritize and all of that. It so happened that I have functional responsibility, but I'm also responsible. So different companies also will assign different, because each board member had certain responsibilities in addition to your functional responsibility in our company those days. But companies may use different responsibilities for different people. Finally, at the end of the day, chairman is responsible for the company. Similarly, the CEO or MD or whatever who's responsible has to be mentioned. But that can be only done if the functional activities are done, because it's a bottom-up exercise. No, operations happen through. So that's why the entire company has to have a risk-aware culture. Very important. Because if everybody is not aware of how things are happening, what are the risks, they won't even know when to activate it, and they don't know what to take as actions, right? So actually, this exercise I was showing you, I think 2008, Japan had a huge tsunami. No, even this week also they had a tsunami. That time they had in the northern part of Japan, they had a nuclear power plant also there, right? That was at a Richter scale 9. Now this time it's 7 something. No, so at that time, Toyota and even Nissan, I think some of the automobile companies had their operations in that part of the world, that part of the Japan, right? Now, Toyota took a long time to come back to know. So time to recover and time to survive was much longer than Nissan. Nissan had an operation in Latin America. So they were able to quickly transfer some of the volume there, and they started quickly come back on track before then. So because again, the timing and how you, so they would have been so conscious of that fact and closer and all of that, but they were able to quickly come back on track faster than Nissan. So you need to look at, sometimes it's not the best of the companies who will quickly come back on track. So there is some research article where they have compared a Japanese disaster and an African disaster. That African disaster has quickly come back to normalcy than the Japanese disaster. So it's not the strongest company will have this thing. So if you have a robust system, how small you may be, you will be able to come back on track faster. So there was a research paper who really evaluated 2 disasters and looked at how quickly they got back on. So they didn't hit the rock bottom. They just had a short dip and then quickly come back on track. So how well you do that, mathematically they have formulas and all that. I didn't want to confuse you with all of that. But they do a lot of scientific studies on this, and they look at how well your supply chains are managed and all of that. So that's why it's very important that knowing your supply chain is very important. End-to-end supply chain. So visibility and transparency in the supply chain, everybody in the organization should be fully aware, right? So full awareness about the supply chain. Everybody must know where it is coming from, how are you disposing, so the ethical aspects, everything has to be understood. So KYS, like in a bank, you do KYC. Supply chain, if you're in KYS, is very important. Know your supply chain well enough. How well you know your supply chain will determine, otherwise you will be suddenly having risks which you are unaware of. And remember I mentioned earlier about the risk appetite. So when you are if you're here, red zone, now you need to go to the bank, sorry, not go to the bank, go to the board and explain to the board, okay, I had to de-risk this. I had to de-risk it. Now for me to move this risk from here to the yellow zone or amber zone will cost me $200,000. But if I want to de-risk it and bring it here, green zone, which is very safe, will cost me 500,000. So if you have a supplier who's a strategic supplier based in China, now you had a problem and you feel that you need to now find another source. So the safest thing is, if you have the capability, bring that supplier and develop a supply locally in Sri Lanka. That's the safest option. But it will require a lot of money. You don't have the capability, all of that. But you bring it closer to a place where they already have similar operations, like in India or some other place, then it doesn't cost you so much. So you had to put all these figures on the table. Board will decide, okay, no, I will only take this because I don't have, my risk appetite is this. I can only afford this much. So you should be able to put all these numbers on the table to whatever the best of your ability, so that it's easy for the board to take a decision. Because finally, at the end of the day, you have to de-risk the supply chain. And to do that, you need to understand this. So because when you always count the cost of disruption and put the numbers on the table, it's easy to understand. It actually will help. The board will also know. Otherwise, you say, I think we should bring it to Sri Lanka, or I should. So, okay, so how much does it cost? Tell me, what does it involve? What does it entail? Numbers, easy to understand. So you should try to at least do a ballpark figure, back of the envelope calculation to understand how much it is, right? Rough idea will help us. So risk appetite has to be understood about the company's risk appetite for you to de-risk supply chain. So if you are the person who's doing that, you need to understand that. So finally, there are different levels of maturity when you're looking at supply chain risks. If you don't have any understanding about the risks and no structure in place, very poor visibility, nobody in the company has any visibility about the risks, and they don't have any problem, they don't have any understanding. We don't do any proper risk analysis, threats we don't even know. So we don't have any system in place, you are in a very low level. So maybe you become level 2. We have some internal processes in place to understand the risks, and basic analysis of threats are being identified, right? And there is some amount of visibility across the company about the risks. But if you're a matured organization, you have a formal risk assessment methodology like we discussed. Okay, list out the risk, prioritize the risk, what is the outcome, then you prioritize. When you're prioritizing, you need to look at the risk appetite and contingency measures, preventive measures. So all those processes are in place. There is always collaboration among the supply chain partners, internal and external. And there is information visibility and risk sharing within the company and with external stakeholders. And you have a fully fledged response mechanism in the form of a business continuity plan in place. This is actually a must-have in companies now, right? Maybe to what extent you have is a different story, but at least you have to start thinking about it if you don't have. Otherwise, you will have huge issues. So, in summary, this is the normal situation that we will have to live by, because disruptions are very common now. Back-to-back things are happening. So we must live with this new normal situation that we are in. So we need to really look at, I didn't explain this. We need to look at how are we going to look at there are ways to minimize the risk, right? So we need to really look at risk response based on risk appetite. I explained to you, red zone to amber zone, red zone to green zone. How much does it cost you to move from one to another? So you need to put all those numbers on the table. Then it's easy for you to convince the board. And if they take a decision to be on the amber, that's their problem, because you have put forward all the information. If something goes wrong, they cannot find fault with you, because you have given the option to them, board decided based on the resources available. So it's minuted and it's there in the board meeting minutes. If something goes wrong, even if you are the functional person responsible, you have put the risk on the table. You've done that. Then you can also decide, nowadays supply chains are becoming shortened, because long supply chains means risk is a bit higher. So distributor offshoring is, you bring it closer to home. Nearshoring, you bring it in-house. Inshoring, you can decide whatever you want to shorten the supply chain. That's what Apple has done. Earlier it was in China. Foxconn has an operation in Chennai. So they brought some of the operations to Chennai. They also do it some products there. So like that, now in US is bringing things back home. Now we in Sri Lanka don't have the ecosystem and infrastructure to bring it home. So at least we must decide how things are distributed, the distributor offshoring happening in the world, and then piggyback on that and move there if you have some advantage in sourcing from those locations to de-risk. As I mentioned to you, we cannot put all eggs into one basket, learned a bitter lesson. So therefore, if you're sourcing from one location, learning from the experience earlier we had during COVID, we need to have a backup plan. Don't ever do single sourcing. Have a backup plan. You need to have another source. Doesn't mean that you will proliferate suppliers. You will at least have a backup plan or two so that you can activate plan A or B if something goes wrong. China plus one strategy. If you're sourcing from China, you should have another backup plan. We were focusing more on just in time, reducing cost. So our focus was fanatically on cost. Cost is good, it will not go away, but you need to also have just in case, right? Just in case if something goes wrong, you have to have inventory buffers. You cannot work with zero inventory or minimize waste. You need to have just in case stocks to be on the safe side, right? Now, digitally, supply chains can really benefit if you work in a very archaic systems, you don't have any digitalized and no technology being used, you will really have problems and you cannot respond faster. So you should have systems to track and trace. Traceability has to be improved. Maybe that's why companies are using RFID. Some companies are looking at blockchain, already using blockchain to really look at traceability of supply chains. Now there are a lot of various platforms that will give visibility on shipping lines, so the shipments, all of that is there. So that will actually remove the, it will actually improve the visibility, and then your confidence level on the shipments will go up. And finally, everybody is responsible for managing the risk. So company must actively promoting the risk-aware culture, not averse culture. We have to make the company aware about the risks. And more people know, more better they are informed about the risks and the actions to be taken, then you will not have a disruption within the company. So very important to understand this aspect. And you should be, this I forgot to mention, you should be, Gartner identified this. So let's say this is the ecosystem. Same landscape you are experiencing. This is the, let's say, the whole universe of things that you are experiencing. So this is risk shaping. This is risk. Responders. So your supply chain, you should move from here to here, meaning you are exposed to many risks, right? The normal traditional way of responding is you respond to the risk. That's how we do. Very knee-jerk reactions. There is a risk. Okay, I have a response plan. But what is important is how can I minimize the surface area that is exposed to these risks? If you can minimize the boundaries that you have through preventive measures in place, you will not get exposed and become vulnerable. So if you are a risk shaper than a risk responder, you don't really look at the risks very well. This is actually the terminology that Gartner has identified. So they say, like, if you have more surface area for the risks that you have around us, the chances of you getting impacted is much higher because you are exposing yourself too much. But if you're a risk shaper, means you take mitigatory measures, you critically look at it, like what you said, annually review, proper review, it is part of your day-to-day business plan. It's like business as usual for you. Managing risk is because everybody is risk aware. So you are making your exposure lesser and lesser because you are more aware, you're taking precautionary measures, so you're not that vulnerable. So you become a risk shaper. So your surface area that you have to expose to this risk around you is much lesser. So therefore, you become a risk shaper. So before the risk happens, you are very smart and you respond. Because you are not exposing yourself, you are not getting even impacted. So you should become that's another learning. You should become a risk shaper versus a risk responder. Being very responsive. You should become a risk shaper, like a demand sensor. You sense the demand. You don't wait till looking at the past history and all of that. You near real time, you pick the data. So you can be more closer to the demand and you will be more accurate in responding to the demand. Because otherwise, 3 months before you look at the past historical trend and you take 3 months to do that, the time closer to that, when the stuff comes, the market demand has changed. You become sensing means now with this technology being available with artificial intelligence and all that, you should be able to constantly sense what's happening and you could take corrective measures. Right? Complex words, names, theories, but I hope it didn't overwhelm you too much. And that's about it. And again, as I gave you another homework, try to do this exercise. I don't want to check what whether you've done it or not. It will benefit you. So what you did in the group exercise was risk register and prioritization. Here, select a recent supply chain disruption and identify major risks for a company supply chain with risk response. Now you have to focus on risk response. How to treat, how to tolerate, how to, using 4 T's. Treat, tolerate, transfer, and terminate. Right? Try to do that. Similar questions only, I'll give it at the exam. So try to practice it in your own usual time. It will help you at the exam. Right? So this will help you. So I hope it didn't overwhelm you too much, but a useful exercise. So since it's something new that I have added, give me feedback if it's too much for you. If you think it's useful, do you think it's useful? Because I removed facility location module and use this. Facility location is anybody can, you don't anyway do that in your day-to-day operation, but this is useful for anybody. So I removed that module and then introduce this. Do you think it's useful? Yeah. So if you need any clarification, further clarification, you can reach out to me. I think my number is given there. Yeah. Some videos for you. And my number is here. Email is here. So if you want any, and my LinkedIn profile is there. So if you want to contact me, you can do always reach out to me. Okay. Okay. If you have any questions, you can ask further questions. If not, break for lunch before you start. Research that. That in research that.